Welcome to Eye on the Illini. This is Mike Cagley, and as promised, I have Matt Stevens with me. He has done some traveling across the country today. We didn't want him up all night, so we had him. We decided to do the podcast here this evening so we could talk a little bit about this Penn State versus Illinois game. Matt, as I watched the game, I thought a couple things came to mind. One was while Illinois didn't win the game, they looked good on screen for recruiting. I know it was a 2-touchdown game, but it didn't get out of hand. And at least Illinois can say we hung in for 3+ quarters with arguably maybe the second best team in the Big Ten. The other thing I thought was interesting about that game was I really thought that Illinois had an opportunity and they messed it up with that parade of errors. And then I'm going to say something that a lot of Illini fans have disagreed with me on. Based on what I saw of the Penn State team in the second half, I think if Illinois would have scored to go up 14-7, they still probably would have lost 21-14. But we'll never know what will happen because that would have put a little pressure on Penn State. But boy, oh boy, the final thing is I think Penn State is a very good football team. I do not think they are on the level of Ohio State, Alabama, Texas, or Georgia. And I just don't think if you slow down that running game, I don't think Drew Aller is quick enough at his foot speed that if you can put a little bit of a rush on him, he becomes a very average quarterback very quickly.
Oh, okay. Let's address the first thing first. We're in agreement. I thought for 4 quarters, Illinois at least looked like they belonged on the field. That's a start. Guys, read my column on Illini guys, okay? Developmental steps always need to be made when you're rebuilding a major conference program. They never are skipped. Steps are never skipped. And that's an important thing to distinguish, right? You show me the last program that went from unbelievably terrible to elite that didn't have – the only one I can remember is the Malzahn Auburn team that went to the national title game after going, after that year after they fired Gene Chizik. They had 3 miracles in that season. Literally, like games where the name on the game is some sort of miracle. And so I just don't I can't and oh, by the way, Auburn's a blue blood program. So you can flip it like that, I don't remember like another program that can just go from being below average to elite like that. Right. It just doesn't happen. But what you can do is you can go from below average to good, and then you go from good to great, and then you go from great to elite. And God, I mean, James Franklin's been at Penn State for how long? And they've gone from good to great, and they're trying to get to elite. And yeah, I agree with you, Mike, that they're not there yet all the way. But
yep.
Look, we'll get to the second part of this, which is I told some people on my way home from Pennsylvania, I thought Illinois lost this game 2 years ago in recruiting battles that they didn't win up front, whether that's on the offensive line or on the defensive line. There are kids that are playing right now not at Illinois that would have helped them last night. And I think that would have been a different ball game if they'd have been on the field wearing orange and white. And I just personally believe that. I think the D line is very thin and it's very inexperienced, and it's holding its own. But it was a concern that you all had and I had on August 1st when camp opened, and it's still a concern now. It's not for lack of effort, and it's not for lack of player development, because Terrence Jamison does that extremely well. He might be one of the best in the country at doing that. But going and getting dudes, no, he's not one of the best at that. He's not Rodney Garner. He's not the guys at the elite level that are getting those types of dudes. And there have been dudes. I've railed on this. There have been dudes in state that could have been gotten that haven't been gotten. And so Illinois is at a severe disadvantage up front against the Penn States. Look, let's just, and I said this in my column, There are two other games that I think Illinois is in trouble with up front, Michigan and Oregon. I think everywhere else, and look, I saw Rutgers on Friday night from my hotel room. Like, yeah, they can run the ball and they're physical, but they don't have players. They don't have dudes that Illinois can't look at and go, no, we can't figure out a way to scheme it up to go into, New Jersey and beat Rutgers. Like,
right.
We can go into Piscataway and win that game. Sorry, we can. And so I do think there's two games left on the schedule, one at home, one on the road, that I think Illinois is going to have to figure out a way to scheme out of a physical disadvantage that they have at the line of scrimmage. Saturday night was no different. Penn State is it's not even that Penn State is physically more, imposing than Illinois, and they are, but they have a way to scheme it up with their two running backs when they don't shoot themselves in the foot. And we'll get to that. That I feel like Penn State, look, the perfect example is I turned to one of my colleagues last night and I said, well, this game is going on. I go, the 2023 Michigan game plan that they had at Penn State, that would work great right now for Penn State. This ball should never go in the air. And if Penn State had done that, Mike, I do think that it's a 28-7 game at the end. Your final point of, I wrote about this in the sidebar feature before I left Beaver Stadium. Yeah. Bielema mentioned it 3 times. You cannot have first and goal at the 2 and then kick a 45-yard field goal and then miss that 45-yard field goal. And the irony of all ironies, it's the first red zone opportunity that Illinois didn't score points this year. That's the first time that hasn't happened this year. And yeah, I'd love to see a situation in which Illinois punches that in, makes it 14-7. They go to the half. Penn State would have had the ball first coming out of the second half. I would have loved to have seen what Penn State did, because, that we're going to get to my final point, which is I wrote a preview about the Andy Kolenecki, Aaron Henry matchup. I didn't think Andy Kolenecki had a great game. I did not think that he put his quarterback, Drew Aller, it was a very, very weird game. I don't even think it was a game plan. It was very, very different, very, very weird play calls, in the sense of I feel like they screwed around on first and second down. And then there were times in the middle of drives where they were like, hey, Drew, bail us out with this long out. We're going to throw this long out route that is going to take forever to get there. And, oh, by the way, we're going to throw it to a receiver that can't turn up field and, get the yards needed to move the chains. There was no vertical route with their wide receivers that stretched Illinois at all. And then Andy Kolenecki's famous for his crossing routes which we didn't see much of. You didn't see that either. What they did was they screwed around with one of their better players, Tyler Warren, and had him do direct snap stuff. And then they would figure out, oh, well, maybe we ought to just run the ball. Now it's 3rd and 4. But we've already run it, in the A gap. Can't really try to do that again because, Illinois is going to figure out how to plug the A gap twice in a row. They're not dumb. And so, hey, Drew, save our butt here. And he's not at a level where I would have been mad if I was Drew Aller. I'd be like, you're not helping me out. And now you want me to bail you out on this 3rd down so we can move the ball because by the way, everybody in the stadium knows our kicker stinks. So we're not going to be able to make a field goal. That's great. That went back to last year when James Franklin fired the OC because he wasn't helping Drew Aller out either. And I'm not trying to bail Drew Aller out.
Now I was going to say the only thing I have to say, is and I really like Aller. I think he's got a lot of potential, but I've seen so many games like this. And to me, I don't know what he does until he cleans up his footwork, because if he has to change his steps as he's trying to throw, it's like he has to start over and get reset. And so he is much more vulnerable to a pass rush. Not that it has to hit him, but a pass rush that makes him change up his footwork kills him. And again, I'm not saying a good kid, and he looks like a comic book superhero. You know what I mean?
Right.
But somehow he's got to get the agility drills going, because until he gets that fixed, the example I give is Tom Brady or Dan Marino were able to take just one step that freed them up from a defender and allowed them to throw the ball. And where they just need one step to evade a rush and get rid of it, he needs about 4. And you don't get that time even when you're playing the Fighting Illini.
No, you don't. But I also think this is now a 2-year problem in which Penn State, I don't feel like, has athletes on the outside that can go make plays. And I think one of Drew Aller's best gifts is being able to throw the ball vertically down the field. Penn State doesn't do that. And Andy Kolanecki is still acting like he has Jaden Daniels from last year. Like, dude, you have a guy that can literally throw it down the field, and you have 2 tight ends that want to go vertical or they want to cross, and you would have so much success doing that. But they don't do it. And or at least they didn't do it on Saturday night, because I feel like they were so afraid of, first of all, I think they thought Illinois secondary was a lot better, and they proved to be really, really good. I think we're back to, again, 2022, maybe they don't have 3 NFL guys. Maybe they don't have a Devin, a Quan, and a Sydney, but it's pretty close. And I think the secondary is the spine and is the strength of this Illinois defense. So maybe they didn't want Drew to, and you could tell that, Illinois was kind of trying to play too deep and kind of go, okay, we're not going to let you beat us over the top like you have all year prior to this. But Andy always runs these crossing routes, and if Aaron's going to play man, that's the other thing though too, is that I thought I saw Penn State catch Illinois in man when they were in it, but Aaron has shown a tendency to allow himself to play a lot more zone when he's coming with pressure.
I noticed that they really did look like they were playing much more zone than I would have anticipated.
And the reason he's able to do that, Mike, I think, is because he has a secondary now where they feel like they can make open field tackles a lot better than they made last year. So that helps out a lot. So I just felt like it was a weird Penn State game plan that allowed Illinois to kind of, Teddy KGB, hanging around kind of thing all night long. And the problem is physically up front, if you flip it, okay, Illinois' offensive line was overwhelmed. They flat out were just overwhelmed at every spot. And that's because Penn State has NFL dudes. I said to somebody earlier this afternoon when I was coming home, when he's not jumping off sides, Abdul Carter was the best player on the field. When he stayed on sides and then rushed the quarterback, that young man is the closest thing I've seen to Javon Curse in a long, long time. He's a freak. He was a really, really good outside linebacker last year who could have been drafted out of that position. They have now moved him to defensive line. He now looks like a different human being, and he's still as explosive. That's really scary. And so when you combine that with, the atmosphere that is Beaver Stadium, and it is loud, and it is a unbelievable, confusing atmosphere with those fans, you have yourself a hell of a defense. Manny Diaz left Tom Allen an unbelievable defense. And they're going to win a lot of games because I think that they can go create havoc with their front seven. And because they're physical, they're fast. And I think after having played for Manny for a couple of years, they're really, really smart. They get how to get to the quarterback. And Luke Altmaier was overwhelmed. And
they were coming from all directions, right?
Exactly. There was a point, Mike, where it was Katie bar the door. We're not trying to run anything deep.
When you can't run a slant,
you could you can run those shallow slants. And look, they tried. I told people on our game room, they tried, and then they'd get a pre-snap penalty. They completed a ball to Zachary Franklin, who, by the way, wasn't healthy and still played his butt off.
Right.
They completed a slant. I think it was for 14 yards, and then it got called back because of a pre-snap penalty, of course. So they tried that on the first play coming out of halftime when Penn State made it 14-7. And Barry knew what the bread and butter go-to was, but when you run that and then you get a pre-snap penalty and now it's 1st and 15, that's not going to work anymore. And then you can't run the deep stuff that they've been doing down on the perimeter.
Luke's dead.
Right, because Luke, your offensive line can't hold it enough for Luke to.
I'm with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a major problem. And then the third part was, Mike, you're going to get mad at me. And if we had fines at Illini guys, you'd probably want to fine me. But we got a lot of geniuses in our game room that want Illinois to throw it 60 times a game and really get frustrated at these 1 and 2 yard runs.
And Luke would be absolutely positively
Dead.
dead if he took 60
dead.
Because I felt sorry for him back there because
Right.
literally, as a long time, played football and helped a little bit coaching it, you have the infamous lookout block where you watch a guy go past you and you yell look out to the quarterback. And I really felt like with the speed differential, there was not much Illinois could do. And I think the biggest issue that Illinois had, and I still think you're probably right, is it comes down to Illinois has to win more recruiting battles for the guys who can make a difference. Because right now Illinois's got 3 or 4, but other teams like Penn State have 15. And
Yeah.
you have to be able to do that. I'm not expecting Illinois to win the Big Ten, but I am hoping that they get more guys like Steven Chen who are part of the family, like we saw in the tweet, because you're going to need to fill certain holes. And I want to be just as loyal to the players as possible.
Right.
But you're going to need to upgrade in the interior offensive line, the interior defensive line, and you're going to need, I mean, the linebacking position was night and day when you compare the two linebacking crews.
Right.
And it wasn't that the Illinois guys weren't trying hard. It wasn't that they're not smart. It was just the fact that the other guys were bigger, stronger, and faster at some key positions, and it makes a big difference over the course of 60 to 70 plays.
Well, I'll use names. Like, I think, look, again, we've got a lot of geniuses in our game room and our message board. Some of them need to get off of Dylan Rosiak's butt because he's been playing his butt off. And when he is able to do what he does well, he does it very, very well. He might be the only middle linebacker that has the size that can actually do what these coaches want to do, though, in that room right now. Because James Crute, as insane of a human being as he is still 215 pounds, and he's still too light in the rear end for them to play him more than 25, 30 snaps a game.
Right.
They can't do it. And it's only his second year in the program. So we're not, the development of Tank Wright is going to happen for him. But I'll use a name. Put Jimmy Roller right next to Dylan Rosiak, and okay, now we got something here, right? Put any of those in-state Chicago Catholic League defensive linemen over the last 2 years that Illinois had gone after and didn't get any of them. Put them on that front seven, and then now we got a ball game here. Now we got help for T-Roy Edwards. Now we got help for, if you even get Dennis Briggs in the portal, if you need to, maybe you don't even have to do that anymore, but you got help for Gabe Yakus up front. We got a different ball game now. But those kids aren't coming to Illinois right now, and they have to start coming to Illinois. My only point also in the run game, though, is that, Mike, you saw in the second and third quarter, when it was still a one possession game, you saw those 1 and 2 yard runs turn into 10 and 11, 12 yard runs with Caden Fagan and Josh McCray. That's what happens. It happened in Lincoln. It happened at Penn State. It's going to happen throughout the year. You're going to have 1 and 2 yard runs. Okay. In 12-round boxing matches, you have body blows. Okay. By the 8th and 9th round, those body blows accumulate, and then they become knockout blows. That's what Illinois does in the run game. And I felt like Illinois was getting there, and then nope, we forgot to hand number 3 of the football. And that was a mistake for Barry Illini, because I think it was very weird, Mike, because you keep looking up the scoreboard and it was 14-7. But I can understand how Barry thought, well, I've only got maybe 2 more possessions. The way that this game is going,
yeah,
I'm only going to have 2 more possessions. So we got to go. We got to put it in the air. I think if Illinois had stayed more patient, maybe they would have figured out another way to drive, because the opening script, again, drive, made it 7-0 Illinois and looked really, really good. And then Penn State and Tom Allen, who's a really, really good defensive coordinator, made an adjustment. And then Illinois tried to adjust off of that adjustment and then almost got itself out of its own rhythm. And by the time they got back to the rhythm of their running game, Penn State had just physically overwhelmed their offensive line, and it was done. But we go back to Illinois looked like they belonged on the field with probably somebody who's going to make the college football playoff, I think.
I agree.
And I think that that's a good developmental piece. Now, if you're Illinois, you're pissed on the plane ride home because you think you had chances to win the football game. That's a good pissed. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so, I think Illinois takes a lot from this game. I don't think the 24-hour rule applies. Also, because you're on a bye week now, you got a lot of time to look at your first failure, and that's what Brett Bielema kind of called it, and figure out a way for it not to matriculate into a second failure and a third failure. Because right now, Brett Bielema is smart enough. Look, he can play he can play the fool if you want him to. Like he can do that. But he's a really, really smart football coach. And I think he's already starting to figure out, okay, there's now been something out there on film that people can go, okay, that's how you beat Illinois. Right?
And Michigan is going to use it.
Sure.
Because they can't
Illinois
pass.
can also now look at this from a bye week perspective and go, okay, what adjustments do we have to make so that people can't just basically copycat this film and beat us? Because we can't turn one loss into two and two losses into three if we can afford it, if we can help it. So I do think that this week's kind of critical for Illinois to not only build more depth, because I think they're going to use these practices for the guys that aren't playing a lot, because the guys that are playing a lot need a break, and they know they do. But I also think that they're going to look schematically on, okay, you can't just change who you are.
I agree.
When you flip the script to October. That's not how college football and a football season works. But you can tweak some stuff that we haven't done yet. We haven't really tweaked that yet. And you have 2 bye weeks now. You can use those bye weeks to tweak some stuff and come out with some wrinkles that a Michigan and that an Oregon and that a Rutgers and that a Minnesota haven't really seen yet. And I think that that's important. And I think that Brett Bielema knows that. And from a schematic standpoint, you're not going to see a completely different Illinois team on both sides of the ball, but you are going to see tweaks, and you are going to see maybe more personnel people be involved because of the reps they're going to get during this bye week. So it's critical. I don't think it's a panic for Illinois that they lost this football game, not in any sense of the word. But I do think they need to get back to work and figure out a way to not have what 2022 happened, which was 1 loss turns into 2, 2 losses turn into 3, and now we've got a problem. Now there's a book on how to beat Illinois, and that's not what they want. And I don't think Brett Bielema is going to do anything but not work his butt off in the Smith Center to try to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I have total faith in that. Is there any trying to think of how to ask this question? Is there any reasonable thoughts that Illinois maybe, especially with the way Lunny calls some plays, could they use the passing game to set up the running game? Because I'll tell you, with Zachary Franklin, and Patrick Bryant, they offer an awful lot of ability to catch the ball on controlled, think of the old 49ers, the 7-yard slant that might go for 50, but at least you get 7. Those guys are big dudes. They know how to use their bodies to keep the defender away. Can you go to a little bit of that where you force people to cover a little wider, and which gives you the opportunity to get McCray and Fagan out in space? Because I do think when those guys get the gap outside the tackle at their size, they win an awful lot of matchups because a lot of these defenders in the open field don't want to deal with a 250-pounder who's relatively mobile.
Mike, Larry asked me that on the Illini Sports Spectacular, I think this last weekend. My answer was, yeah, they're doing it. Like, I know it's hard for people in the layman's sense to say that. Mike, I've stopped tweeting that Zachary Franklin is apparently, I did it every week for 3 straight weeks, that Zachary Franklin is apparently the cheat code today. Like, Zachary Franklin is the cheat code every week.
I would have went to him a little more often earlier. Sure. And
I think there's two elements to that. One, I don't think he showed up at State College 100% healthy.
I agree with that.
So that's one. And two, I do think they try that. I do think from a shotgun RPO sense, they do the 49ers, quick slant game with Jerry Rice and John Taylor, like that I grew up with. They do
Yep.
that really well with Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin. The other thing I thought they did really well last night, at least once, and probably a couple other times, is I thought on the screen that I wasn't really a screen. It was kind of a dump off to Josh McCray, but it was schemed where it almost looked like a tunnel screen with Henry Boyer and Pat Bryant, where
Right.
like the Red Sea opened up out on the
Right.
perimeter, and Josh McCray can just go through the old school, like Vince Lombardi. You get a seam, you get a seam here and a seam here, and you're going like that was like a 25-yard just dump off to Josh McCray where there was nobody in that tunnel. Yeah, you're seeing that. I think Illinois the last 2 weeks at Lincoln and then at Penn State, they tried that. But eventually you got to go back to a running game that sometimes was getting stuffed because the interior of Illinois' offensive line was just getting overwhelmed. And
is there anybody on the bench?
But again, you also saw in that third quarter that when Josh McCray wanted to stick his foot in the ground and make a cutback, suddenly now it's 12 yards. When Caden Fagan has a counter play where he can just freaking go, like just hit the hole and go, it's 10 yards. Yeah, right. I mean, he leaves this game, Mike, with what, 60 some odd yards on 13 carries in a game that was again. I think the one thing that Barry Lunny leaves Beaver Stadium with is, damn it, this was a one-score game and we only gave Caden Fagan 13 carries. Damn it. Yeah. Like, if we give him 20 carries, like maybe we had it. But again, look at the drive summaries. What did Illinois have? Like 7 possessions? Like, again, another game in which you can't really screw around. Like,
right, exactly.
And so I think Barry got in his own head a little bit because he felt rushed because of the lack of possessions that he was getting in this football game. And
is there any offensive linemen? Is there any flexibility?
Yeah, I know what you're going to ask.
Around, at the guard position.
Yeah, his name's Brandon Henderson, and I think he's going to get a shot. Like, I'd be surprised if Bart Miller's not trying to figure out a way to maybe plug him in. And I'm when you on the second week of August tell the entire local media group that Brandon Henderson can play all 5 positions, and your offensive line looks overwhelmed against a Penn State, then maybe Brandon Henderson should probably be tried in one of those 5 spots. Like, again,
now, how many defensive lines? Because as I look through the Big Ten,
2.
Cause I was just saying, because Ohio State looks good on paper, but they don't create.
Oh, I was just thinking about, again, what's left on Illinois' schedule because Illinois doesn't play Ohio State.
Oregon and Michigan, right?
Correct.
And I don't know that you go outside of those. You got maybe Iowa, and then I'm not even sure if Ohio State would qualify in that category.
Probably would, though. But yeah, I get your point.
Yeah.
But what's left on Illinois' schedule? Yeah, Michigan's defensive front is going to be a problem.
Yep.
A big problem.
Yeah, huge problem.
And Oregon's defensive front is nasty because Dan Lanning makes damn sure that they are nasty. So, and they recruit well. He's still using the remnants of Mario Cristobal and Dan Lanning's, SEC recruiting with that defensive front. You're seeing in-state Illinois defensive linemen go to Miami because Mario Cristobal's there.
And so's a bunch of NIL dollars.
Sure. But okay. There's a big shoe company in Oregon that makes sure that Oregon has NIL money. Yeah. They do pretty well recruiting defensive linemen all across the country too. So yeah, those are the 2 that are going to be a problem. Again, I mentioned our subscribers who I love. I love you all. I love you. Even when I get frustrated with you, I love you. Get off of Josh Krutz's behind. Like, I mean, again, I don't want to play the Aaron Henry clip again, but God help me. Like, what was it, 2.5, 3 weeks ago when he stood up at the podium and was like, look, like, if you think somebody ought to be playing, we're not trying to hold back good players on the bench. Like, if they can contribute, they will be playing. If they can't, they won't. If you think somebody else at center right now is better than Josh Krutz, the head coach, the coaching staff at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign disagrees with you.
Well, and I think people were hopeful on Wigginton. I think they were.
Sure.
And so.
And I'd love to know what Kevin could have done had he not suffered the thumb injury and then the lower body, essentially like hamstring injury that he had in camp that set him back too. But nobody thinks and I love TJ McMillan. His dad played in the Arena Football League, Bob. He's going to be good. He's not ready right now. And the funny part about it is that everybody wants to jump on Bart Miller's behind, right? And some of it's deserved. But can you imagine? First of all, let's get real here. Can you imagine what Illinois would look like right now if they hadn't gotten the 2 tackles out of the portal? And then you go, okay, Mike, I'm not a scout. I've never been a coach at the college level. I never will be. But when you let me watch like open practices like Brett Bielema did a couple of times then in preseason camp, Josh Getsky was the best offensive lineman in camp. It wasn't close. And he has started out the year and he has struggled because he has physical limitations. And that may be a spot where Bart Miller tries to get creative and say, hey, Zach Chrysler, maybe you should only play 50 snaps. We'll supplement you with Getsky. Maybe we'll throw Brandon Henderson into that left guard spot. I think he's going to tinker. But I don't think he's going to tinker to the point where the chemistry gets blown. And I don't think he's doing anything with 64 in the middle. I just don't. I think, look, I think Krutzy would be the first one to tell you that he did a really good job of picking up Luke every time that he missed an assignment on Saturday night. But I don't think that Krutz is too small to play in the Big Ten. I think he has the capability of being a really, really solid Big Ten offensive center. Even though he's not this kind of size of center that Brett Bielema usually has, there's physical limitations with Josh Krutz. There just flat out is, but you'll take that because I think schematically and then from a identification standpoint, he's usually pretty spot on with what he wants to get accomplished. And so, I do think Illinois will look to maybe look to the portal again for interior offensive linemen, but what you've got is what you've got right now.
Exactly.
So
That's why I was saying.
You think there's anybody not playing right now on the offensive line that can do it better than Josh Krutz? The staff just disagrees with you. And so that's a frustration. There's also, I want to address this too. Here's the problem when somebody like Khalil Valentine has a really, really good opening, couple of weeks. He's also a freshman, and he left his quarterback to die practically every time he would go out on the field because he didn't touch anybody he was supposed to in pass protection. And when you do that, Thad Ward hates that, and he will pull you immediately. And that's why Khalil Valentine's not playing as much.
And look, let's face it. He's probably never had to block in his life. And
it's the thing that true freshman running backs can't, literally cannot do.
And he's got to learn how to do that at 180 pounds against a guy who's 240 and might have more quickness than he does.
Right. And Aiden Lawfrey is still trying to get back completely from an injury plagued last season and try to find his role on this team. I think it's still the speed component to what Josh McCray and Caden Fagan can do. I think they're going to roll with that 3-man rotation at running back, and Illinois is going to be fine. But last night they were not fine. And a lot of it had to do with Penn State just being able to overwhelm. And the other thing I think that needs to be addressed on this pod is that I asked Dylan Rosiak after the game. You guys can see the video on IlliniGuys on our YouTube page. I asked it of both Dylan Rosiak and Miles Scott. Do you guys feel like you just got physically whipped, or do you feel like that's why Penn State ran the ball? And they both looked at me and said, no, we don't. We think there's some elements to that, but it wasn't something that they couldn't counter. They got out schemed in the run game, and they feel like they left gaps open, and it wasn't like they were getting blocked or blown off the ball, but they were leaving gaps open to where that's a scheme issue. And that's something you can clean up in the bye week too. So your leaders on your defense, one of which is wearing the radio communication to Aaron Henry, is saying, hey, we had missed assignments. And so that's why Penn State's able to get 5-6 yards of carry with their two, all Big Ten running backs that they have. So That's something that's got to get cleaned up in this bye week too before you restart against the Penn State, and certainly before Michigan comes to Champaign.
Yeah, they've got it. They've definitely got some challenges there. I walked away from that feeling pretty good. I didn't expect Illinois. I usually predict an Illinois win, but I thought this one was a very low probability of happening. I think arguably, Penn State and LSU are the two toughest places to play on the road at night, and I think Illinois did a good job. And to me, they've got to figure out schematically what they can do, and even like finding depth. Is there, do you put in? I know it's what you don't want to do in the Big Ten, but can you rotate in a younger defensive tackle? Or are they just going to get annihilated out there? That is such a tough thing, because even at Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, you don't see very many freshmen who are playing on the defensive line. That's just it's a tough road to hoe. But I was hoping maybe you could find some depth there, or even somebody like Sledge could start to get a few plays, just something, because I thought Tyrod Edwards, for as much as he was out there, I thought he played a pretty good game.
Yeah, he did. I thought the one thing that Andy Kolanecki did really well on Saturday night was they almost used Tyrod Edwards' aggressiveness against him. We've talked about it for a couple of weeks, and I wrote about it last week about how he's been able to get vertically up the field, a la Warren Sapp, a little bit, even with his small size. He did that on Saturday night, and they kind of used it to his advantage, because then they just run through the hole that he was just in.
Exactly.
Right? I think that's something that Dylan Rosiak was trying to say, is that, hey, that offensive guard blocked me, and usually a one-on-one with T-Rod, we can get the A-gap filled up. Well, he blew by his guy, and suddenly now he's kind of looking to his side and going, "Oh, that running back just went right by me."
So that's basically.
I hope Dylan covers that. Oh, he just got blocked. Oh, now it's 10 yards.
Yeah, and that's basically, you're as a playing defensive end. When you see somebody cut inside of the defensive end, he's lost his contain.
Right, and so when you talk about building depth, big week for somebody like Jeremiah Warren, who I think that they want to play a lot of snaps and play in that spot. And so that's a big week for him. Again, a young player, a very, very young player who they have high hopes for, but he's not ready to play, T-Rod Edwards' number of snaps. But they've got to get him in these last 2 months ready to play 15 to 20 snaps. This bye week will be huge for him. So, but I also think, Mike, I think the one thing that concerns you, or should concern you coming out of this game, Illinois had not made mental errors to the point where they did on Saturday night. Now, is a lot of that the atmosphere that is Beaver Stadium at night? And like Bielema said, that we had a lot of guys that just had never experienced something like that before. Sure, maybe. But the first and goal at the 2 turning into a 45-yard field goal, that's concerning. That's a comedy of errors. First down, second down, third down, where you go, guys, what are you doing? What are we doing here? And if Illinois is going to beat good teams, they can't do that. They cannot do that. There is not enough of a margin of error talent-wise and roster, talent-wise, production-wise, to allow Illinois to do something like that. And
the best way to explain that, Matt, is good teams can lose when they play well. Very good teams can win when they don't play well.
Yeah.
And Illinois is just a good team right now. So they can't afford to essentially take points off the board, which is what they did on that set of downs. At the same time, as a coach, you have to walk a very fine line, because you don't want to turn the annoyance over that situation into a head case now, where Illinois gets down to the inside the 5 and now they all freak out because they don't want that to happen again. So you gotta, it's a balancing act. And
the good news is the next 2 games are at home. So I think that might solve that problem real quick. And because Illinois has been up to Saturday night, and then into Saturday night, right before that happened, right before that 1st and goal from the 2 turned into a 45-yard field goal by David Illano, attempt by David Illano. Illinois was 17 of 17 in the red zone this year with 12 I think it was 12 touchdowns, maybe 13 touchdowns. That's really good. I mean, that's so much leaps and bounds better in the red zone than they were last year. Barry made that an emphasis. First thing they do in fall camp, first thing they do in preseason camp, we're going to go from 20, we're going to go into the 20s, and we're going to get this taken care of. That's the first thing they do every year. So they've made it a point of emphasis. They've been better at it. They just self-destructed it in a way. And then beyond that, you had young players who I think are going to be really good players. I'm pointing him out because I think he's going to be a really, really good player over time. Colin Dixon had 2 pre-snap penalties at wide receiver. You cannot do that. Like, you cannot hop like the way that you're doing. But I think you put him in the category of whiteout Penn State, Beaver Stadium at night. He was affected. Like, he lost his mind. And that happens. I've seen it happen to really, really good players when they're 18, 19, 20 years old. That happens. But, okay, this is a teaching point now. So Steps got to get in the room and go, my man, like, we can do a lot of things pre-snap that I can take you getting a holding penalty because you're playing your butt off. I might be able to take that. You getting a illegal procedure penalty, like, that's not going to work, son. Like, not when you're out at the slot receiver and you might not even get the ball. Like, that's not going to work. So that's going to get coached out of them. But I also think Illinois has got a lot of things to clean up after this loss. And I asked 2 guys, I said, Miles Scott and Dylan Rosiak, I said, 24-hour rule doesn't apply to losses, right? And they're like, no, we're probably going to look at this one a little longer. And I do think you're going to see Illinois maybe not scheme it up completely differently, but figure out a way to make this not the blueprint of how to beat Illinois in the last 2 months of the year, because that's always the concern, Mike, is that when you take your first L, okay, what have we given everybody to look at that says, okay, this is how you beat Illinois? And you've mentioned it before, Mike, consistently, even more than I have. But I think the Belichickian in Brett Bielema will go, okay, now we got to figure out. I honestly think they'll take part of this bye week, if not the entire bye week, before that they prepare for Purdue and go, guys, if you were playing Illinois this week, how would you beat us? How would you beat them? Like, and let's do that. And then let's practice that, because we need to know what we've put on tape now that kind of gives people clues on what we don't do really, really well. And is there ways to correct that? I thought one of the things that Brett Bielema said coming out of Saturday night that was really interesting was basically, okay, I felt like I had a really good football team on the plane ride over, and I still think I have a really, really good football team. And he left Beaver Stadium going, guys, I know you're going to talk about the offensive line and how we're undersized. I know you're going to talk about the defensive line and how we have no depth. I get it. I don't think anything that we did tonight is not correctable.
Yeah.
I don't know if anything is exactly true, but I would say 90% of what they did on Saturday night that hurt Illinois, I think is correctable. And I think that that's the thing where you go, wow, man, like, it was mostly a 1-score game for almost all 4 quarters. And everything that Illinois did to lose the game was more or less self-inflicted. So cool. Like, maybe we're pretty good. And I think that that's the attitude that I think a lot of players left that field with. And that's what you want going into a critical bye week where you need to heal up and you need to figure out a way to take these last 2 months and turn it into something special.
Yeah, I think the one interesting thing is that Illinois, the things that they made mistakes on were exploited, and they paid for every mistake because of the personnel and to, at least defensively, the game plan of the defensive coordinator was designed to do that. And I think there probably aren't a lot of teams that have the personnel that can take such advantage of Illinois mistakes. And the other component that I think is out there is, if I was the most important thing to me is you have to figure out a way, whether it's blocking scheme, whether it's different players, but you've got to be able to better protect Luke. I'm not talking about giving him 19 seconds to throw the ball, but there were a couple plays where by the time, he was ready to put a foot down and make a throw, he had two guys around him and he just, he had to get out of the way.
Right.
And they've got to do something to prevent that.
It was the first game, Mike, that I thought we've talked all off season about, the sports psychologist that Luke went to, the mental and essentially on-field results that he's trying to change. He tried to change this off season, and through 4 games, you saw those changes. You saw the ability of Luke Altmaier to adapt to blitzes, get the ball out, and not make mistakes, right? I thought in the second half against Penn State was the first time where Luke started looking at the line of scrimmage and didn't look downfield. He's a human being. He's gotten punished for 3/4 of this game physically. It's just human nature, natural to kind of go, I need, like, I'm to kind of just basically kind of like have your head on a swivel at that point and go, okay, who's trying to get me? Right.
But he still completed 64% of his
Oh,
passes out there and was getting hit. I
right.
mean, he was sacked 7 times. He was hit a lot more than 7.
Sure. And I think, I got the PFF data here, but I also think that Luke understands he's got to continue to have that tunnel vision of, I've got to look downfield, right? I've got to look. That's okay. No, that's Illinois. He's got to look downfield. He's got to continue to look for those receivers, because there are probably times where Penn State sent the house and there were open receivers. Yeah. He wasn't looking down the field to see them, right? And so
I'm just not certain if there was any lanes. I will tell you that
sure.
that was like, holy cow, they got 8 guys there, and there was no one who, one of the things that you talk about as a coach is more of a basketball thing than it is football, but
Sure.
there are times that you're open on the court. The reason you're open is because the person with the ball can't get you the ball. So
Right.
why guard you? And the most extreme example is put the ball in the paint, give it to a center. And then if you have somebody stand in the corner by half court, well, it's impossible to get the ball out to him. And why would you want to do it anyway? And I do think at some point I kept thinking they've got to have a couple designed patterns that they can run that Luke can just throw the ball too blind.
So here's the PFF data: is Luke had 35 dropbacks. Penn State had 24 quarterback hurries. They had 6 quarterback hits, and that doesn't include the sacks.
Right.
So, I mean, that's, if you're Bart Miller and you're looking at those numbers, that's unacceptable. I don't care. That's unacceptable. And that will be addressed this week. We've got to help out number 9 more than we did on Saturday night. And, I just disagree with Brett Bielema. I do think there were times where Luke was trying to make a play and he held on to the ball in the way that Luke always has.
I agree. Yeah, I think that happened.
But I don't think Luke Altmaier was hanging on to the football too much. I think there were times in which Luke Altmaier was trying to dodge large people in blue uniforms trying to hurt him. And he still had the football in his hands because he hadn't had enough time to actually look downfield and see if Pat Bryant or Sakari Franklin or Colin Dixon were open. Right.
Right.
So that's, I think, what happened. But I don't think it was like last year where Luke sitting in the pocket and then creating a sack. I think Luke was trying to get out of the pocket.
I'm not certain there was a pocket. It was more like
Penn State. And here's the crazy thing.
Called a war zone, I believe, in military terms.
This is why I think he's going to play on Sundays. So Abdul Carter had 6 hurries and 2 sacks. Mike, if he stays on sides and doesn't get caught jumping off sides twice,
he's their next Micah Parsons. Huh?
Right. Brett Bielema said it best, and he's a Big Ten lifer for a reason. When Penn State puts number 11 on somebody, usually they're pretty good, right? Yeah. And so I think Abdul Carter is going to be an absolute beast on Sundays when he's playing, next year and for the foreseeable future. But in this one season he's got left at Penn State, I think he's going to be an absolute man-child to deal with. And Illinois didn't have anybody, including J.C. Davis, who I actually think is going to get a look on Sundays too. He had nothing for him. And so
he had a couple good plays, but you're right.
I mean, he didn't have – look, again, Abdul Carter's on the field for 24 pass rush situations. He gets 8 hurries, 2 sacks, and 6 quarterback hits. Like, that's insane. That's absolutely insane.
Well, the one thing I think we're going to have to see, is you have defensive linemen. I mean, people are using 8, 9, even sometimes as many as 10 defensive linemen during a game. And I wonder if at some point offensive lines are going to have some sort of substitution pattern as well.
Right.
Just to give guys a break, because if I'm playing 60 plays and I've got to defend 2 guys playing 30 each, and they already were quicker than me when they showed up at the stadium, that gives you wonder when some offensive line innovator is going to find a way to counter that.
Well, I will tell you, Brett Bielema said on Saturday night, we've got to figure out a way to get some reps. And he means game reps with our number 6, our number 7 offensive linemen.
No,
that
I agree.
Probably has to happen. That's going to be a bye week priority as well. So again, I say it, Brandon Henderson's going to be on the field a lot more now, I think. I think you could see Hunter Whiteneck on the field a little bit more now.
Because he's a big body, and sometimes you just want to. I keep seeing him. He looks like a walking mountain, and you're just thinking to yourself, "Gosh, if he could come out and help out even for 10 or 15 plays."
I remember last year when they stuck him out at right tackle, not permanently, but because of an injury situation, and he pancaked Abdul Carter. And that was his claim to fame was, man, we put him out there in a really tough spot and thought he was going to get whipped, and wow, okay. And so that made him, stand out in that 22 recruiting class where it was like, okay, yeah, we got one. We got one. And that was impressive. I think he's going to get some snaps. He's definitely going to get some snaps in practice. I think he's definitely going to get some looks for game reps. I do think, Mike, from an interior offensive lineman standpoint, maybe not with Krutzy, because I think you still want him out there because from an identification standpoint, he's the best.
Well, then you put 2 big guys on either side of him. Then that's fine.
Or you put 4 big guys. You rotate maybe 4 big guys around him at guard, and I think now you got something. And they're so. Again, this is why they went to the portal and why I said, can you imagine what would have happened if they hadn't gotten the 2 portal tackles? They are so light depth-wise at tackle that it's insane. So I do think Priestley and Davis are going to have to be out there. But yeah, Mike, Brett Bielema even acknowledged we need to build more depth in our offensive line to be able to use in games. And specifically, I think Bielema is looking at it like, hey man, it's still 82 degrees at the end of September and early October in these games. We don't want these guys playing 70 snaps a game. That's not optimal. So yeah, I think you're right. Look, there's a lot of things that you can look at in this game and go, oof, that's not good. But there's a lot of things I think you can look at and go, well, that works. In a 4-quarter game against a really good team, that works. And so Illinois didn't dissuade me at all on Saturday night from thinking that it's still an 8, maybe even 9 win football team, based off of the way that they were able to keep it a 4-quarter game and a 1-score game for most of those 4 quarters at Penn State. That's what I take from this. And I think your biggest, and I'll end with this, is that, man, knocking on wood here, but your biggest thing that you took from Saturday night was, I don't think anybody got hurt. And then, my God, I don't know how that's there, Mike. I said it. I'll say it. I'll say it on this pod. That last drive when it was 21-7, it was clear that Illinois wasn't going to win the football game, but they were trying to make it 24-14, 21-14, and then maybe then try an onside kick. That was the dream. I kind of looked sideways at everything and I went, you know what I would do? I would pull number 9 right now and make sure that he's available for the last 2 months of the year.
Yeah.
But I do think I talked to Tanner Arkin about this. Here's the other thing you learned. I talked to Tanner Arkin about this. What did you learn about your quarterback? I learned he's tough. I learned he's a tough son. You know what? Like,
I saw him
yeah.
take enough hits last year. I wasn't concerned about Luke's toughness.
No, I know, but like again, when everything kind of went the way it went at the end of the year, Luke still had to build up some stuff with his teammates again.
Yeah.
And I do feel like his teammates left there going, man, this guy will fight with us. Like, and that's big. That's big for somebody who, while he wasn't voted a captain, they consider a leader. And so, again, I think Illinois has all of the pieces to be an 8-win football team, and maybe a 9-win football team if you can figure out a way to, knock off, a Rutgers on the road, or knock off a Michigan at home in that Red Grange game. There's nothing that you saw on Saturday night that should dissuade you from that. Whether it was, I don't think the game plan, the philosophy on offense, the philosophy on defense is going to change much coming out of this. And if that's the case, look, Illinois. Again, I'll go back to my column on IlliniGuys.com. No, Illinois is not ready to be the elite of the Big Ten yet. But did you think on August 1st that was on the table? Because I think a lot of people, if they're being honest with themselves, would say no. But I do think Illinois is good. In 2024, Illinois is good. And they've gone from below average in 2023 to good. And when you're good in this league, people talk all the time, Mike, about Power 2, SEC and Big Ten. Gee, it's so hard to win in this league. And it is. Don't get me wrong. It really is hard. But when you start to look at it from a 1 week here, 1 week here, 1 week here type of situation, winning 8 games in the Big Ten isn't nearly as impossible as people make it out to be. And I do think that Illinois has the capabilities of going from a 5-win program in 2023 to an 8 or a 9-win program in 2024. And if that happens, then I've said it before, I feel differently for a lot of reasons, a lot of, how do I put this? Attitude reasons about how this coaching staff approaches recruiting, and some resources that they can use in recruiting. I feel better about looking at a 8-win or a 9-win program coming out of 2024 with this coaching staff and how they feel about using resources in recruiting than I did in 2022 coming out of an 8-win season, and how they were approaching what they were doing in that off season. And so I think this could be the springboard for Illinois. And I think you saw on Saturday night in front of everybody, this was in front of a nationally televised audience. Everybody saw in your front yard what was going on. And they didn't look like, oh, gee, it didn't look like, hey, Illinois doesn't belong out there. Clearly, Illinois doesn't belong out there. If anything, I had more doubts about Penn State being there's no doubt in my mind that they're a CFP, they're going to get a CFP berth. I ended up with more doubts about Penn State than I did about, the final 2 months of Illinois season. And because from an expectation standpoint. And so, I think it stinks. The first loss always stinks, but you go into the bye week 4-1, and I think everybody on August 1st would have taken that.
Totally agree. And we want to reiterate, you look at this team this year, and we really think that they have shown an awful lot on the field. They're going to have some challenges coming up in the next month, and then they have an opportunity to really wrap up the season strong. This is the opportunity that Illinois has been looking for. Under Brett Bielema, we don't have to worry about the 3-2-1-0 win seasons. We're getting this team to where, every year it's a rush to get close to the 500 mark, with a nice year, that we went over the top. And I think that's where you need to get first. I've never really bought in that you can turn around a program with a snap of the fingers. Maybe Kurt Cignetti is going to prove me wrong, but you have to have that base of recruits. You have to have the players that fit the system. You can talk to Luke Fickell about that. And it's not easy to maintain this. You can talk to PJ Fleck about that. It's a very challenging league, but I do feel like with the additional NIL support that can come in, I think Illinois can compete. And I look at what Brett Bielema does, particularly defensively, but all of a sudden now the offense is starting to look much more up to speed as well. But I look at what he does with players, and there's a lot of individuals that I would think, gee, if he can do that with a 3-star, what could he do with a 4-star or a 5-star? But you have to have the NIL funds generally to grab those people. So,
well, and you have to. You look. I'm not going to let JMO off the hook on this. Like, I'm not going to let Bart Miller off the hook on this. You also got to go get dudes.
you got to close.
You got to go get dudes, right?
Yeah, you got to close. That's part of the sales technique.
I mean, you got to go get dudes. I mean, like, and I look at Penn State's roster, and I look at Penn State's 22, like they're starting too deep on both sides of the ball, and I go, oh, they got dudes. Like,
yes.
So I look at Illinois' 22, and I go, man, they got really hardworking kids that play their butt off, but how many dudes do they have? Right.
Well, Illinois does a good job of playing. Brett Bielema is a systems coach, and he puts them in a good system. And what you saw, like with Penn State's defense, is they have a really good system with a lot of dudes. And if you can do both things, and I really believe, there's also that element of toughness,
sure,
which you can say. I mean, again, tough doesn't win you games, but it also keeps you in games that allow you to make plays to win them.
You're talking about let's not sugarcoat it. You're talking about locker room chemistry too, which I think Bielema does an awesome job at.
Yeah,
unbelievable, awesome job at. And there are other programs that are, let's just say, portal heavy and NIL heavy that I don't know whether they have a great locker room chemistry if things were to go awry. Go look at Oxford, Mississippi right now. There's a potential kaboom going on right.
Well, if there's a kaboom going on down there, we'll see somebody in Florida next year. Then
maybe, but yeah, no. What I will say is this: I think Illinois has the potential to still have a special season. Nothing in Saturday did that. What I also say is that I do think Illinois has the ability to. I think this offseason, parlay what they're doing now into success. I think we've talked about the 4-star guys that they're trying to flip right now. You can add another one. I saw today that Chris Burgess is getting a visit from Illinois coaches during this bye week. He is the Simeon defensive lineman who is friends with Malik Elzy and is committed to the University of Notre Dame, and is going to get a visit from Terrence Jameson and Clint Stenham, who is the new offensive outside linebackers coach, who wasn't able to go visit him because he was a late hire, in this process after, Brett Bielema had to hire those 3 new defensive coaches right before spring ball. So that's fascinating. You get a Chris Burgess. This is what I'm talking about. Is there are in-state guys that can go get the passer, go get the quarterback, and they can make a difference. And so that's what
Brett Bielema said he needs his IO. He needs that one guy who's going to change the look. And I'm telling you, when it does happen, it will be a beautiful thing, because Illinois, if they could start keeping, you're never going to keep all your best recruits at home. Nobody does. Texas doesn't do that. But if you could keep, 6 out of the top 10, 6 out of the top 15 in the state of Illinois, those 6 out of the top 15 players in Illinois, if they would start going to the Illini every year, you would have a team that looks even better than this one does today, with difference makers that would be able to potentially close the gap in a game like this.
It'd be a hell of a percentage that Illinois has never gotten since probably Loxley was in, was the OC at Illinois.
And I'll be honest with you, I'm not certain they've ever got that, Matt, because of the entrenchment of in the olden days when I was young, the entrenchment of Michigan and Notre Dame were the primary ones. Then all of a sudden you had Iowa, Wisconsin, Ohio State, and of course nowadays Alabama can drop in and grab somebody.
I just think Illinois has had 2 guys in my lifetime who have been let's go get dudes guys. Like the way that Rodney Garner has throughout the entire SEC. I'll throw out some guys that I know of. Rodney Garner, David Turner at Mississippi State. He's a go get dudes guy. Like they're never going to be head coaches, but they just go get dudes, and that's why they get paid $1 million to be a position coach. One is Mike Loxley. He was just, let's go get Mike Lox is going to go get dudes. The other is Austin Clark, who got, Keith Randolph and Johnny Newton out of Florida. He was now with the Miami Dolphins. Like he was a go get dudes guy. And I feel like Illinois needs to start having guys who are just go get dudes guys. And Stepp might be one of those guys. George McDonald was trying to figure out to be one of those guys, and now he's at Ole Miss. But I think Corey Parker could be one of those guys. He's a go get dudes guy. I mean, trust me. So yeah, I think Illinois fans should be encouraged by what they saw as a whole on Saturday night. There's a lot of things that need cleaned up before they play Purdue in a couple of weeks. And I think that Brett Bielema is going to make sure that happens.
Yep. And I appreciate that, Matt. And of course, if you've enjoyed our conversation, you can subscribe at IlliniGuys.com, 27 cents a day. First 7 days are free. What really makes it different is the message boards where we have a community of Illini fans who can go back and forth. But more importantly, that's where Ked, Brad, Matt, Larry, myself, you can talk one-on-one with us. You can ask questions, and you can get a very two-way conversation going, as opposed to reading a newspaper where you read the article and you wait for the next day, et cetera. We do a lot of communication back and forth. And if you want to go there, of course, that's where you can find our stuff. You get everything ahead of time, and it's a very, very nice deal. Also, we have our IlliniGuys.com YouTube channel. You might be watching it right now. Please subscribe there. That is cost-free. You can get the podcast there. And, of course, all of our audio podcasts are available on podcast distributors across the way. You can get them just about anywhere. And look for our 2 radio shows, the Illini Guys Sports Spectacular, our weekly 2-hour Illini-centric show, and Big Sports Radio, our weekly 2-hour Big Ten and big sporting events of the weekend show. We have a lot of stuff there. And what we try to do is we try to talk sports. We try to have some fun. We don't yell and scream at coaches or players, and we never talk politics. So please go that way if you need to take a break. We are a great way to do that. With that, we will be back later on in the week. Until then, go Illini.